Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Ramirez, and I am very excited about having with us today one of our own teachers and leaders of our training program from Lebanon. So Zeina Dbouk is with me today. Zeina is based in Lebanon. She's got a fascinating background and story, but we met Zeina about 4 years ago in one of our trainings. And since then, she's just become an integral part of our work across the Middle East and around the world as far as training teachers in how to teach human rights, human dignity, pluralism, and for freedom of conscience. So, Zeina, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm so excited to be able to kind of give everybody this kind of sneak peek into how you came to work with us and your passion for education.
Hello, Tina. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you today. I'm talking to you from the south of Lebanon. Uh, we met 4 years ago, and for me, that was a turning point experience for my career. I've been a passionate educator, a passionate person about human rights, because, like, if you have an idea living in Lebanon and being born here during the Lebanese Civil War, it's like witnessing violations for human rights for the whole of my life. So being raised in that context, I witnessing a Lebanese civil war that started in 1975 and ended in 1990 when I was like 10 years old back then. I've witnessed a lot of examples of violations of human rights in my context. And as I was growing, I was living the remnants of the Lebanese civil war, seeing people divided, seeing people fighting over things, not respecting each other, violating themselves for economic status, for religion, basically, even being denied the opportunity to go into some places because of a religion or a sect. These ideas I've been raised to. However, I was lucky because parallel to what was happening in the environment around me, I had a father who was an activist for human rights himself. He worked in the government, and he was one of the people who always rejected the corruption that was really very spread as we were growing as young kids. So everybody around me was accepting bribes to perform a job or to serve others, but not my dad. We've never been born into a rich family. He lived on his salary. It's against all the Lebanese here who work in a public service system because it's the best place for people to take bribes and make a huge fortunes. So later in my life, after having those core values, if you want, embedded, my dad was imprisoned during the Israeli occupation in the 1980s. And he left home for like 1 year and a half. And back then, when we were kids, we didn't know where he was. But when I grew up, I knew that he was imprisoned. And I had the chance to ask him about, I'm sorry. That's fine. We can keep this part because it touches me emotionally. I got to know about the suffering he faced and the pain he had to pass through.
Zeina, how old were you when your father was imprisoned?
3.
Oh my goodness. So you
Yeah.
lost your dad for 2 years.
Yeah, but with the aftermath of the imprisonment went way beyond that because he lived on pills for the rest of his life. And sorry. Yeah. Actually, I would keep that part. But I think the imprisonment of my dad, it made me the person that I am. I spent hours and hours talking to him about what happens to people when they are in prison and how, when they are subjected to this injustice, they remain solid and they keep the values there and they fight with their pens, with their opinions. So when he left the prison, he never changed his conceptions and he became a solid fighter for human rights as well. And he started writing anonymously in newspapers about human rights, about how the government should be, about how the system should change, about how sectarianism and divides and hate should end. And last year, we just published his book after his death.
Wow.
And yeah, we collected all his articles for the first time. So for me, I was a lucky person because despite all the corruption in the community, I was surrounded by a home that embedded the values in me. And as I was growing, I was more attentive into the injustice around me. I think this goes back to the way I was brought up. And I went to law school, maybe for that. But in my second year in law school, there was like a fight in the university. And I had to drop it for security reasons. And that's when I went to education school. However, when I became a teacher, I never forgot the background I had as a lawyer. And I started bringing a human rights topic into my classroom.
Wow.
Because as I was teaching, I was seeing those injustices in the classroom, and I couldn't remain silent. Let me take a breath here.
No, that's amazing, Zeina. I know. I had no idea. I mean, that's the first time you've shared that. I didn't realize the impact that your father had in your life.
Yeah, and he just like passed away a couple of months ago.
Oh, that must be so sad. I know. I'm so sorry for your loss. My grandpa just passed away who had a similar impact in my life. And so you miss them because they're such a part of every memory and part of who you are. And so having that book, I'm sure, is really meaningful to be able to remember him. What a amazing person, though, that after he was, I'm sure, tortured in prison for a year and a half, and I'm sure you didn't even think he would be coming home, but when he came home, that instead of responding with hate and anger and violence, he responded by putting his energy into writing and fighting for the rights of people to not be treated that way. I mean, that's what made you who you are.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
what a
I
great
guess
legacy.
I guess a lot. Thank you. I guess a lot of the educator I am today goes back to my dad, and goes back to that sense that you really get when you are a child. I think that's why, as an educator later, I felt that what a child takes and what is raised upon indirectly makes the greatest impact in his or her life. That's why our role as educators, when we try to target kids as young as possible in our education, we create the best impact possible.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why we're so focused on it, and it's why it's so exciting to have you here, because you can share that experience with people to really understand, like, on the front lines, what does that look like? What does that transformation that you see look like? So it's also fun because I'm an educator myself. I started out doing junior high and high school education and teaching history, which you also teach Lebanese history. So it's very fun. One of the things that we've often talked about just, offline is that, I'm a single parent. And so even when you first were involved in the Hardwired trainings, I couldn't be there. Lena was there because I had to fly back home from Iraq to go help my daughter, who was 2 at the time. And so, but you are a single parent as well. You went through, a divorce in the midst of this. And so I've often heard from many of the women that we work with, just the impact of our own advocacy on human rights on their children. Can you share a little bit about that with your own daughter and like what it's inspired her to do?
Yeah, for
Like, what
me,
is the legacy that you're leaving your daughter? Your father left you this amazing legacy.
like I've never noticed that I was role modeling for my daughter indirectly, because like she has seen me working a lot, and we talk about things but not so directly about human rights openly. But then yesterday, she's a grade 5 learner, and it was her PYP exhibition. It was a surprise for me. I was invited as a parent to see the presentation of the kids. But then I was amazed when I got to know that my daughter's topic was advocating for human rights, gender inequality, and she was calling for gender equality in the community. And when they asked her, why did you choose the topic? She said that I chose the topic because I've been raised in a house where my mom is a fighter. and we had to pass a lot. But then I felt it's unfair to her as a woman to pass through all she has passed through. But I believe we have a voice and we can voice it. So she advocated for that cause. She invited her friends to share her cause. They did interviews with women's rights activists. And what amazed me is their understanding of the topic. And then she told me, we are not calling for women to overrule. We are calling for equal respect and coexistence between the two genders, because gender equality is about the equality of both men and women. It's not having one group overrule the other. So I felt very proud, and I felt that the change has to start within our own homes. We as educators, we as advocates for human rights, we need to create that impact within ourselves. And the change starts from our own homes with our own kids, and then it multiplies to the community. Thank you for allowing me to share that story. That really touched my heart.
Well, you're leaving this legacy for your daughter so that she knows how to fight for the values that you fought for and that your father fought for. And I think that that's just beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
So 4 years ago, we met you and you were an educator. So tell me about your classroom in Lebanon and some of the challenges, because most people aren't familiar. So Lebanon went through a civil war. Tell us what happened, how it divided the country, what are the factions in the country, because most people don't have a context for that. And then we'll talk about how did you address that within your teaching, because then I want to share when we met some of the interesting things that we began to discover about how to kind of navigate these challenging spaces to help people better, move forward.
Yeah. In Lebanon, in the context in 1975, which was 5 years before I was born, a civil war started. And the big title of the civil war was a religious war. However, if you go into the various reasons behind the war, religion was the surface of the war. However, there were other forms of injustice, if you want, or divides in the community that were simmering. And then the religious incident divided the country into Muslims and Christians. So the country itself, from 1975 till 1990, was split into two parts: the Muslim region and the Christian region. And there's a line in between that nobody is allowed to cross. And during the Lebanese civil war, lots of people died. And the war was really very intense and very hard. And I lived 10 years of my life moving from one country to another, one city to another, running away from soldiers and seeking safety. So in 1990 or 1989, by the end of the year 1989, an agreement called the Ta'if Agreement. Ta'if means sect. A sectarian agreement took place in Saudi Arabia, which held all those fighting components of the Lebanese context go and sign an agreement, which is like, I consider a temporary agreement, which is still working till today, where they split the pizza. So every fighting group took a section of the community. All the employment opportunities are divided sectarianly or a sectarian way among people. Even the government, like you can never dream to be a president if you are a Muslim. You cannot dream to be a head of parliament if you are a Christian. So they divided the roles not based on your potential as a human being. They divided the roles based on your sectarian, regardless you are the right person for that position or not. And this goes down to every aspect of the community, all the employment, everything has to be religiously balanced and divided according to religious seats. So, and then it is a religious and political affiliation. So people who took control of those religious groups are political leaders. And the political leaders that were the people who caused the war are still the people ruling the country up till today. The same exact names, if not themselves, their kids. So for me, the Ta'if Agreement was able to put the physical war into an end. However, the remnants of the war, the aftermath of the war, it's still there. The divides is still there. The hate is still there. People still ask you based on your name, where are you from? or what religious group do you belong to? You are still unable to buy land if you are living in a street and in another street, because this is a Muslim neighborhood, the other one is a Christian, and there's always that fear of invasion. The Christians invaded us or the Muslims invaded us. So whether they want to confess it or not, it is there. Like in the school where I teach, it's a community where we have mixed religions, but the majority of our students, like 99% of our students, are Muslims, because that school is a Muslim school. And 90% of the schools in Lebanon are religiously affiliated, which means that the divides have led to further divides still living up till the 21st century. And like 5 or 6 years ago, after the war in Syria in 2012, a lot of divides came back to surface in Lebanon. And you could go into the classroom and see the students talking about religions and religious divides without them understanding the root causes of that, or why is this happening. So that's where I had to intervene myself. Like here in our history books, the last thing that students learn is about the Lebanese independence, 1943, and that's it. So all the Lebanese young are ignorant about what happened after 1943, which is the time where a lot of divides, violations of human rights happened, but they don't teach them about it. And up till today, it's prohibited to teach about it. So for me, being a teacher in the private sector, because in the private sector, you have the freedom to work with your curriculum as long as you are meeting the standards of the state. However, in the public, you would need permission from the government to be able to choose the curriculum you want. You cannot teach anything freely. So that's where I was the first teacher in 2012 to dare bring the Lebanese civil war into the classroom. I had to read about it from various perspectives so that I teach it objectively. And I took that topic into the classroom, offering various perspectives, heading or dealing with the concept of causation, the causation of war and the effects of war, and how the effects are still affecting our personal dignities every day. And that's when students started seeing something for the first time and learning, and where they went to their own homes and asked their parents about stories about the war. And they had to look at it from a critical perspective. They were no more repeating the perspective of their parents about the war, because it seems that their parents told them the perspective from one angle. And it was necessary having that topic brought into the classroom to hear different perspectives without taking sides from my side, just opening it, using the proper questions to bring in this debate, the proper articles, the proper material. And then I was lucky to find a group of educators who were actually members in the war. They fought in the war and they regretted it afterwards. And that's when they opened an NGO called Fighters for Peace. They came into my classroom and they talked to the students about how they regret fighting the other person because he or she is different. And they told them that they are spending the rest of their lives fighting for peace because they have lost their families, they have lost their dignity, they have lost their self-respect. And that is the only way for them to regain it, is by spreading awareness in schools and through educators. So even with my learners, after they learned about the Civil War, they started wanting to advocate for human rights and advocate for unity in the community. That's when they started a campaign and they marched for peace, and they invited students from 15 schools in the area, and they marched in the streets calling for unity, calling for acceptance, calling for human dignity. They were more than 700 students. And I have a video for that I might share if you would like to. But then I felt...
When did they do that, Zeina? When
it was in 2012.
Wow.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years ago.
Yeah. And then these same students are now, most of them, members of NGOs fighting for human rights. So you open that door And I think you measure the impact on the long run. That's my experience with the Lebanese Civil War.
Well, it's so fascinating to hear that 10-year trajectory of where, like, seeing the students opening their minds up to a history that was forbidden, which is crazy to think that your whole current events, current history, that you just ignore it, the last 70 years essentially, and then to see how it inspired them. It's interesting because I had a similar experience when I first started teaching, and I had just finished my certificate in Strasbourg at the International Institute for Human Rights, and it was my first year of teaching, and I wanted to see what kind of an impact teaching about human rights would have on students. And I was teaching US history and the US Constitution, so very similar to what you did. And I remember I had a little boy from Afghanistan in my classroom. This was pre 9/11, and he was very violent, would go around beating kids up because, that's all he knew. And through the course, I was doing my master's at the time, so I was observing and collecting data on their perspectives, their feelings towards others, all of this. And so from the beginning of the course till the end of the year, I began to see this transformation in this little kid. And he was a small kid, but he would just go around beating kids up. But by the end of the year, he was not violent anymore. And they did a human rights project, and his project was on the women in Afghanistan and how they were being treated. And so he wrote this letter to then President George Bush and said, these women in Afghanistan are like women's in a cage, are like birds in a cage. They don't have a voice and they need one. Will you please speak for them? And this is when women were being stoned to death there. So it's just horrific. And he had developed this level of empathy for people that he didn't really care about before. He wasn't violent anymore. He, treated his fellow students differently. And it was so fascinating to see, when you teach kids in a different way, how to think about the value of others, and to not resort just to their perceptions that have been embedded in them from, the prejudices that they really inherit, unfortunately, from family, society, from everything. They begin to change. And 20 years later, I was just with one of my other former students who was actually a girl from Syria. Her family were Syrian. And she said, Tina, do you remember you made us write this essay on freedom isn't free? And I'm like, oh, I did? I don't remember. But she said, it was so amazing. And I've been in touch with her throughout the last decade with the civil war in Syria. And she said, you were the first one that helped me feel comfortable with my identity and be able to express what we had suffered and find an outlet for it and understand that I had rights. And she's literally lived, the last 20 years sharing these ideas and living with that foundation. So those seeds that you planted in 2012 are so valuable. And Zeina, I know I want to talk about what we've done with our program, but what's been so amazing to me, and maybe you had this experience when you first came to our training, is everyone that's come to our training has said, this is the first time I felt comfortable talking about religion or conflict or what's happening around me. I never felt comfortable before. It was a taboo. We were never able to talk about it. And it's so therapeutic to so many of the people that we meet to be able to have a space and a framework where they can talk about it. And I'm sure for your students, they were just going their way, ignoring really the elephant in the closet, because everybody said, you can't talk about this. Yeah. But they always knew it was there, and it informed how they saw how they were treating others, the feelings they had. And so it was probably so therapeutic for them to be able to just relax and to say, okay, now I understand how we got here, and we don't have to live here forever. They went out and they protested. They said, we don't want to live in that, denial for the rest of our lives, in that place of segregation, of fear. We want a different way. So anyway, I shared a lot, but what are your thoughts?
This is very much true. But then I need to tell you that, when I first started in that lesson in 2012 until we met in 2017, I changed as well, because I became, through the training, more empowered to address, because at that time I addressed the topic directly. So I was there in the classroom talking about the war directly, talking about religious divides directly. And maybe that opened the door for many students to speak up and act. But at the same time, it hindered some of the students the chance to speak freely, particularly those students who had family members participating in the war. So maybe they felt a bit ashamed. And that is when I noticed that taking place. So that's why when I went into the training with Hardwired in 2017, I came back to my classes and I addressed the topic through the analogy of the fruits and with 11th graders. And I cannot describe the impact. The impact was amazing. The students, they acted, they went to the stage, they talked about the issue. They were able to draw the connections themselves because the method was not direct again. So we did not embarrass anybody. The analogy itself, it brought the topic indirectly to surface, opening the chance for students to share freely from their own context. And they took me where I wanted eventually themselves without me imposing the concept on them. And after they did the play, which talked about freedom of conscience, belief, and religion, and it was demonstrated in a play form, and it was shared in front of more than 700 person. Part of them is their other parents, a school community, the outside community. The students enjoyed the experience and they reflected amazingly how transformative it was. But then in 2019, October 2019, riots and revolution in Lebanon started in the street. And the students were first year at university. And that's where I met them in the street. We were marching and they saw me from a distance, so they came running. Ms. Zeina, we remember that experience. And we wish that we could bring that play to the street and play it, because when you were teaching us, we knew the connection is there, but now we are living it. And now we need it the most. And now we wish that we could pass that experience to others. And that's when I felt that's what we want. So teaching students about respect for human dignity through the Hardwired training program, the way it is designed, the way it is addressed, it empowers, first of all, it empowers teachers, because myself, it changed me. It changed my approaches. And then it would allow teachers to be able to work freely with students and be able to twist the methodology in a way that would open that safe environment for everybody to experience that change we aspire to see in our communities. And my students were an example, and I was really very proud. And that's when I decided to go further into the program, because I felt it's a need, and every teacher has the right, the equal right, to learn about it, to help those students and those learners to build a more peaceful community that respects the right of everybody.
Well, you said it beautifully. So I'm going to take a step back and give people a context. So when we met in 2017, we had been working with some teachers across the Middle East to begin to pilot this training program that would help them develop ways within their own cultural context to teach about pluralism and freedom of conscience, and to help overcome some religious tensions and divides in the society. And so we had just finished with a group in northern Iraq that were, planning on going back into areas that have been controlled by ISIS in Mosul and the Nineveh Plains. And they wanted to know how to address the conflict there, how to help kids that had lived under ISIS, that were brainwashed to hate and kill people that were different, and the refugees that were coming back in that had been persecuted by them, to know, how do we live together in peace? How do we overcome these challenges? And we went to Lebanon, we went to Morocco, we went to Kosovo, we went to many other countries, in the last 4 years. And when we were with the group that gathered in Lebanon, it was so interesting because we use a simulation, as you discussed this play, we use a simulation in all of our trainings. And the reason that we do that is because this is such a difficult topic to talk about. Most people don't want to. And they don't want to talk about the skeletons in the closet, the bad stuff in their history. They don't want to talk about the things that really cause conflict. But obviously, like you said, it's like a pressure cooker. I mean, it's about to blow because people are so filled with the fear and the misconceptions and the bias that they've developed over time, or just the bitter retribution, just anger, you name it, or fear from both sides, whether their family was involved or not involved. And these things are just welling up inside of all of these kids, and they don't know how to release it. And these kids become adults, and it's welling up in the society, and no one knows how to release it. Mm-hmm. And unless you address it, unless you have this pressure valve that like allows the steam out, people explode. We have more conflict. We have recurrent cycles of conflict. And so really Hardwired's goal within Northern Iraq and Lebanon and so many of these countries was, how can we help let out some of that steam and help people find a safe place where they can begin to discuss some issues that have been so taboo, that have been prevented in society, so that they don't have to succumb to that kind of conflict or cycles of violence again. So your children don't have to experience what you experienced as a child, Zeina. No one should experience that. And these poor children in Northern Iraq that we work with, they wasn't their fault that they had been overwhelmed by ISIS and then brainwashed. They couldn't escape. And so it's tragic. And so how can we help in those environments rescue those children from that violence, from that cycle of conflict and hate? So we started with the simulation, and the simulation, as you described, uses fruit, because fruit are not controversial. Some people want to be the bananas and some want to be the pineapples, but other than that, there's not a lot of conflict. But we use fruit because people can identify with a fruit as opposed to a religious or a cultural or an ethnic or tribal group, and you can have a diverse group of students, whether they're Muslim and Christian or, whoever, come together and identify as one fruit together and begin to take on the identity of a fruit and go through this simulation of challenges and experiences where their identity as a fruit is attacked, where they're forced to reconcile that with the freedoms that they want for themselves when they're then living with other fruits. And how do we navigate in the space of people that have different cultures and beliefs? How do we navigate rights together and history and sufferings and fears together? And so it allows that safe space for that to happen. And then after you as a teacher have gone through it in that initial training 4 years ago, it's kind of like this aha moment happens. The light bulb goes on, like, oh, wow. And then we talk about it. So I want to first talk about when you first went through that simulation yourself in Lebanon. And then we began to talk about what you experienced. What was that like? Tell me, what were you thinking in your own mind at that time? Like, what was that? I don't know.
For me, I was really eager to learn about, will we be able to do it in Lebanon? Will we actually be able to go courageously and venture into that? Particularly in 2017 as well, it was an intense political time in the Lebanese life, and there was remnants of war ready to explode at any time. So the community was not at ease, and people were fighting over various aspects, and religion was brought into surface, even in the classrooms, because in Lebanon, even religion is affiliated to politics and to color. For instance, if you are belonging to a particular religious group, then green is your color. If you belong to another, yellow is your color. So one time I was going into the classroom and I was wearing a particular color. And then one of the students asked me, do you support that group? I was like, which group? And then they named the group. And then I said, why? They just referred to the color. So I noticed that the young people are really living those divides, but they don't understand them. So when I went to that training, I was equipped with the tools that I wanted to take in and try with that same group. I was saying, would it work? Let me give it a try. And when I did, because I actually used the training material for 2 or 3 years, I repeated it with different groups. And the impact was amazing. And when I was teaching it, I saw that the students are relating to it differently. Each group relates to the same concept differently. And at the midst of the experience, they start feeling that comfort to share their own stories, bringing them into the surface. Like one of them had to also, he had his dad fight during the Lebanese Civil War. And then he told me he was fighting another person because they have different religion. That was not right. I should tell him that. So he went home, he talked to his dad, he brought that experience to the classroom. He critically reflected on that behavior, rejecting it and standing for human rights. Additionally, I noticed, like with a group of students where we tackled that topic, that the level of bullying in the classroom was less, because students in the classroom bully each other because of their lack of understanding of the right of the other person for different aspects, for economic status, for color, for appearance, for size, for different aspects. So it is not only through the training I learned, it's not only about religious divides, it's about the respect for diversity, respect for human dignity. And along the way, you would learn as an educator to see things differently, because like many of the issues that would pass by you in the class unnoticed, no, you would pause and you'd say that behavior that came unintentionally from the student, it should be focused on, it should be taken from there, and you should address that issue and monitor the change and see how the students are learning differently. And through that training that day, I didn't know if it's going to work, but when I tried it, I became an activist for it, and I'm like training other teachers now to go through the same path and experience the same joy and pass it to others. So I think it was a transformational experience for me.
Well, I remember one conversation that took place during that training where we often talk about, what is intolerance look like in your society, or pluralism, and everyone kept saying, well, we're such a tolerant society in Lebanon, we all get along, we just live in separate places and we get along. And that benchmark for what pluralism looked like was a pretty low bar, but everybody thought we're so tolerant because we live in the same country, we all just have our separate places. And it was really this fascinating time when, and I don't remember who it was in the training, maybe it was you, Zeina, that began to realize, actually, that's a pretty low bar. We need to go higher, because true pluralism really requires that we actually actively engage with one another, that we don't stop with just our own community and say, okay, you can stay over there and we're tolerant, because we're all in the same country. That actually incubates a lot more of the fear of others, and then you see explode. And so, being able to then take your students through this process where they began to diffuse a lot of their fears and misconceptions as well was so critical to really achieving that higher standard of what pluralism really is. So then when, what's amazing is, so the students, we turned the simulation into a play, because simulation is about fruit. So we turned it into this really creative play. You did the simulation with your students in the lessons, and then you had them perform this play. And then a year later, there's another overturn of the government. There's changes in Lebanon politically again, which I'm sure won't be the last time. And instead of going out and responding with violence or hatred or anger or divisions and more tribalism, like defending one party or the other, they ended up going out and calling for unity and wanting to perform the play for everyone about fruit, which was powerful. I mean, you must have been so encouraged as a teacher, and just,
Yeah.
You must have been so proud of them.
Yeah, I am. And there's one student named Rina. She was in grade 11, and then Rina, she was one of the students. At first, she believed that Lebanon, we are a very pluralistic community. We live together. Like, why are you addressing this? And why do I have to be a fruit? I mean, this is stupid. That's what she told me at first. And then she was pushing herself into the program. But when the discussions were there, she was starting to be more interested. And when the marching happened, she was the head of the team that took everybody to the march. And just 2 months ago, I had to see Rina. She called me and she told me, let's go for a cup of coffee. She's second year at university, or third year. And she told me that she was working on a project with Ireland, and she's a human rights activist. And I told her, what is your topic for the project? She told me sectarianism in Lebanon.
Wow.
And I was like, why did you choose that topic? She told me that's the #1 topic that should be addressed. And I was like, what is your plan? How are you going to act against it? She told me that she met with students from Ireland. They discussed the war and the causation of the war and how it has impacted the communities differently. And how even in Ireland, how Northern Ireland, how the remnants of the war are still present in similar examples as Lebanon. And together they wrote lyrics for a song, which is anti-sectarian song. And they did it online, you know, with these like youth, everything is possible. So Rina, up till today, she's now a fighter for human rights, and I'm really very proud of her. And I'm like looking forward to seeing the young lady where she's gonna be, the fighter she's going to become. And I think we all are going to hear her name soon, because I feel proud that I have had the chance to be part of her growth and be part of her experience.
That's so beautiful. You know, Zeina, it's so important. A couple of things you said. One, when you started teaching it, you realized how much you changed as a teacher yourself. And we've seen that across the board with the teachers that we've worked with. And it's interesting because they become better. And the more the teachers change, every generation of students ends up actually performing better and better on all the things we're doing, because the culture of the classroom changes. And it's a culture that is also the second point I was going to make. It's really important, is that this isn't a culture where you're indoctrinating them or telling them what to think. You are literally teaching them how to think in a way that is critical, that leaves room for recognizing, breaking down differences of opinion, and not being afraid of those differences, but being able to respect the dignity and the differences of others, and that space for people to believe differently, which is so difficult to attain. And yet, you know, you're able to watch that unfold. And we found, and several of the teachers that participated in Lebanon said this, and some of them came into the training, they were from Shia or Sunni or Christian backgrounds, saying we were afraid that it was going to influence our religion, or we would try to, you know, be changed. And they're like, well, actually, we became more secure in our own beliefs and our own way of our own culture as a result of it. We just were able to accept others. How did you feel about that kind of component of it, and your own personal faith? Like, did it reinforce and help you feel more confident in who you are? Or
Yeah, I think that the purpose of the program is not to change anybody's belief. It's on the contrary, to make you more powerful, to be able to defend your own beliefs firsthand. I believe that if a person lacks a skill, he or she can never pass it to others. So first of all, it allows you to delve deep into your own beliefs, to know that sharing those beliefs in public or private is a right. Like for me, even when I was running or passing the experience to other teachers, that is very important. Like on a personal life, on a personal side, on the contrary, it made me able to talk about my religious identity openly, rejecting the fact that I might be put in a box based on my name or family name, then automatically you are affiliated to that religious group. It made me able to talk about that openly, saying that this is my position, and at the same time respecting that other people have the right to have their own space and they have the right to express themselves. For instance, in the school where I used to teach, one of the laws that was governing the school is that nobody is allowed to put any sign that shows their religious belief. In my class, I always saw my students wearing whatever they want, maybe a cross, or they have a symbol that shows a religious belief for others. For me, I respected. I felt this is their way of expression, and I don't have the right to tell them to remove it. I don't have the right to judge the veiled and consider her less open-minded. It is the way she would love to express herself. And at the same time, it made me express myself equally, because in my community, people my age in my religious group, they have to be veiled. So for me, I don't want to be failed, and that's okay. So on the contrary, it does not tend to ask people to change their beliefs. It starts by allowing you to respect that spiritual dimension that you hold, that connection you have with the outside world that you don't need to explain to anybody. It's internal, it's within you. It delves deep into your personal dignity and existence as a human being. And once you are there on a personal level, you are able to see that in the other and respect it, even if you disagree. Like, I can sit with whoever is next to me, even if we disagree on the deepest things. We can disagree respectfully. We can disagree and allow each other to have the space to express ourselves and agree to disagree. And that's okay. So that was the greatest part of the program. And when this was passed to the classroom, it made me able to set those, if you want, classroom rules that I set with the students. The first rule, we wrote it on the ground and we put it as our rule for the year. We agree to disagree with respect. So whatever comes, we can disagree. And then they started using, we disagree, but we respect each other. So not only on religious issues, also on topics that require debate, different perspectives, different opinions. And actually, as a critical thinking teacher myself, this was richness, because in many parts of the world, people are not faced with various perspectives about the other. And actually, when you face people with opposing perspective, this is when you like see dissonance. And when dissonance happens, you start thinking. And that's when you start learning. It's either you change or you become more assertive of what you believe in, or you reconsider your opinions and twist them a bit. And that's, for me, growth is.
Well, I think you described that whole process that we go through brilliantly. And most of the teachers that we've had in our program were not at all familiar with this kind of pathway to conceptually thinking about an idea differently without having to change your inherent, beliefs or identity, but just, can you take off your set of lenses and begin to see things with a different set of lenses so you don't prejudge people? And that's really, that's the core of what we're trying to do. So last year, right before COVID hit, you got to join us in Morocco, where the King of Morocco's senior advisor, a Jewish man, Andre Azoulay, co-hosted with Hardwired this gathering of leaders from the ministries of education in many countries across the Middle East, North Africa, parts of Europe, across the whole region. And it was such a fascinating conference. It was a miracle that we were able to get it done literally a week before airports shut down.
Yeah,
And
it was the last trip I had. It was the last trip before COVID, and then the word went into mess.
well, at the conference, you got to share, and I think so many of those leaders were really moved by your experience and inspired to want to train other teachers in their countries. And so we had opportunities from a number of different countries arise because of that. And so, tell me about, what was it like to be at that gathering and with so many different leaders and perspectives to have come, in this 4-year kind of, or 3 years at the time, this journey with Hardwired. What was that like to be able to share it with them and to see kind of the fruit of all of your work?
For me, being part of that conference was, first of all, a learning experience for me before I shared my experience, because through that gathering with people coming from all over the world, having different experiences, I benefited a lot from the cross-cultural discussion that took place during the training or outside when we were talking in the halls and discussing while we were moving around the country. So I learned about the individual of every country or every context. And I found out that despite every context has its own specifications, we all share something in common. We all share the need for advocating for human rights, no matter how diverse our places in the world are. So for me, I talked from the heart. I talked about the experience that was really challenging, because even in the global image, when you talk about Lebanon, people who read about the Lebanese history in books or articles, they know that religion and religious divides, they have destroyed the country. And if they watch the news today, they would notice that this issue is really a great issue to talk about. We don't even dare to go to the Ministry of Education and ask them, we want to teach about that in schools. So venturing into that topic in the Lebanese context was not easy. Yet, despite all those challenges, it was possible. And not only possible, it was safe, it was powerful, it created impact, and the impact was long lasting. And that's why after that, I think we were able to reach out for other teachers who shared a similar context, maybe a more difficult one or a less difficult one. However, we came to realize through my experience and the experience of Aya from Jordan and other teachers that education is the foundation for such a topic. It's the safest place where you can address that topic with knowledge, and teacher training program is the only tool towards that, because when teachers are empowered, I so much believe in teacher leadership. And I believe that when teachers are empowered, when teachers understand, when teachers are given the tools and the opportunities and the support that Hardwired is giving and is offering, I think change is possible. And each teacher is a multiplier. And each teacher, not only a multiplier, she's an added value, or he's an added value who would bring new examples and new experiences into the program and help in developing it further. That's why we have gone towards that dimension. And through the trainings that we held after the Moroccan meeting in Lebanon, I was able to learn a lot from the teachers who came into the program, and through the experiences, the examples they offered, and those material that I was able to collect either from the example that Aya brought to the Moroccan conference about bullying in her community and how she addressed it. For me, it was an eye-opening experience that showed me that even younger people in her school were able to address the topic differently. Even the experience in the United States that was shared as well. So it brought us to an understanding that no matter where you are in the world, whether you are a rich country, a poor country, a developed, underdeveloped country, violations of human rights are there. And standing for this cause is a necessity, and it's best addressed through teacher training program to reach out for the youth when they are young and to help them grow, becoming critical thinkers, becoming agents of change in their communities. So for me, it was really impactful.
It's beautiful, Zeina. And it was so inspiring for all of the other participants that were there to hear what you've achieved in the few years that we've been working together. But in the last year since COVID, you and I have been, and Lena have been working together to develop this online teacher training program so that we can expand it and actually have that broader reach with teachers around the world that want to participate. Why is there such a need for teacher training? And I asked this of you as somebody that was trained as a teacher in the Middle East. What is the gap that's there for people that don't really understand why teacher training generally, and then specifically about how to address these types of issues, is so critical?
Yeah, because I mean, the concept is daring. The concept is not easy to tackle. So it can be a two-edged weapon. If it's tackled in a wrong way, it would certainly lead to the ideas that we don't want to have. So it's very essential that every teacher, before going into the classroom, to be equipped First, to have the understanding of the concept. What is the concept? How it is understood? What tools can be used to discuss it? What challenges might come along when you are discussing it with students? Because like, you might be in a classroom and you might be preparing the lesson that you have and addressing it, and then something pops up. And in that exact moment, there isn't a third party. There is the learner and the teacher, and there's nobody to help. And it's the response you do, the act you do, the behavior that you do would shape the whole process. So it's very essential that teachers are equipped with all those scenarios and are empowered with the strategies that allow them to tackle the topic in depth properly, to tackle the concept properly, to be able to assess it as a learning material, to allow them to be able to monitor and observe the change in their learners and intervene whenever needed. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, to be able to address challenges that might come up. And those challenges, actually, we have been fed about them from the teachers themselves. They would tell me that this is an issue that I might be scared to address. If somebody reacted like that, what's the best approach to do it? And actually, through all the trainings that we've done so far, we've been able to build those ideas with the teachers. So every group of teachers that join our program, they learn a lot from us. We give them all the package, all the material needed, but as well, we learn from them, because after every training, we go back to our material and we reflect and we adjust so that we can meet the content and address it to meet context. So with the examples that we bring up, like the examples that we might use in Lebanon, are different than the examples that we might use in Iraq, for instance, because the needs of the teachers are different. However, what we come to at the end is having a group of teachers who can choose their issues, who are able to plan how to handle them, and who are able to design learning experiences that would allow them to try the concept further in other examples. And I think that was the best part of it as well.
Well, and what's so amazing is that the training that you are helping us develop, it's going to be useful in any country in the world. So we're going to have people from across the Middle East and North Africa, from Europe, from the Western countries. I mean, we are really excited about it because there's so much need for this everywhere in the world. Pluralism is something that we all need. Understanding freedom of conscience and human dignity. If we don't value these rights in society, we don't really have anything else. And every country has been through difficult times like you experienced in Lebanon. And so it's something that we can all, we can all confront and work through. We often like to say that, we don't try to avoid the difficult or tense conversations, the hard places to go, because conflict never started with things we agreed on. It starts with things that we disagree on or that we don't understand about each other. And so going into those places is really essential to be able to come out and have a society where people can respect, like you said, agree to disagree with respect, which I think is a perfect way of capping it off. So Zeina, thank you for being a part of this work around the world, and for all that you do as a teacher, and for sharing your story. It was so beautiful.
Thank you very much for that experience, for allowing me to share that experience. And actually, I'm looking forward to sharing what we've been working on through the online or face-to-face training with a coming group of teachers. I think that's a great opportunity, which will open the door for teachers all over the world to learn from this amazing program, to have their input in the program at their own pace, maybe during the summer or without even having them, because like one of the challenges that was addressed is that, are we going to spend a lot of time on that? So no, it's a teacher-friendly approach. You can have the material ready. Everything is designed to be given in a short period of time, over some time. So all of these issues were addressed, and I think I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to be further spread among the world. Thank you very much, Tina, for giving me that opportunity, for believing in my potential and highlighting it, And I love you a lot. And thank you a lot for making me part of Hardwired that I'm really proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeina. You are a multiplier, and we're honored to be, part of your story. So
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.